When I visited my daughter-in-law's family, I asked my son to stop at a nearby supermarket to pick up a cake. Suddenly, the cashier grabbed my hand and leaned in to whisper something shocking. I slipped out the back door and began watching him 5 minutes later. You know, there are moments in life that hit you so hard they steal the air right from your lungs. For me, that moment came in the most unexpected place, a grocery store checkout line, when a stranger whispered words that didn't just rattle my world. They shattered everything I thought I knew about my own son's family. It was a betrayal so calculated, so cold, it would make your stomach turn. I was just trying to pay for a simple vanilla cake, something sweet to bring to my daughter-in-law's family later that day. The cashier, an older man, probably in his 60s like me, was scanning my groceries when suddenly, his hand shot out and gripped my arm. His eyes, usually so placid, held an intensity that immediately put me on edge. He leaned in close, his voice a low, urgent whisper right in my ear. And then he said it. Something about my son and his family that left me completely paralyzed. I literally couldn't process what I'd just heard. The man released my arm and went back to scanning items as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But I just stood there, the grocery receipt trembling in my hand, my mind a chaotic whirlwind trying to grasp his words. I stumbled out the back entrance of the store. I needed fresh air, time, and space to think. My heart was pounding so violently I could feel it thrumming in my ears. Could it really be true, what this complete stranger had just told me? Or was it just some misunderstanding, gossip from someone who didn't truly know our situation? I made a split-second decision. I'd hide right there behind some trash dumpsters near the parking lot. From there, I could watch everything unfold without being seen. If there was any truth to what I'd heard, I would soon know it with my own eyes. My name is Adeline Thorne. I'm 67 years old, and all my life, I've worked tirelessly, pouring everything I had into keeping my family together. I live alone in a small apartment downtown, surviving on a pension that barely covers the basic bills. Every single month, I count those dollars multiple times, agonizing over what to spend them on, always putting the needs of others before my own. My only son, Owen, married Sienna 3 years ago. From the very beginning, I felt she was a bit distant, a little cold. But I tried to push those feelings aside, giving her the benefit of the doubt, thinking it was just shyness. But as time went on, I started noticing strange little things about her behavior, and her family's too. I never said anything, though. I didn't want to cause any conflict in my son's marriage. Sienna's family had always been incredibly cordial with me, especially her father, Leonard. But there was always something in their eyes, a certain glint, that never quite sat right with me. They were perpetually talking about their dire financial situation, how they struggled to make ends meet, and without hesitation. I'd try to help them whenever I could, and Owen, bless his kind heart, would always send them something. From my hiding spot, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the grocery store's main entrance. Owen was waiting for me in the car, patiently, probably wondering what was taking so long. The cashier's words echoed in my mind, an unceasing, haunting sound. Barely 2 minutes had passed when I saw something that made me doubt absolutely everything I thought I knew about my daughter-in-law's family. Leonard, Sienna's father, walked out of the main entrance. He was carrying bags, quite heavy ones by the looks of it, but they weren't your ordinary grocery bags. These were from a high-end store, a place I only knew by reputation, a place I had never, ever had the resources to shop at in my entire life. The store's name shimmered in gold on the sleek black bags he carried with a casual ease, as if it were the most perfectly normal thing in the world for him. My heart began to pound faster, a frantic drum against my ribs. Leonard walked straight to a car parked just a few feet from my hiding spot. And it wasn't the old, worn-out car they always complained about when asking for help. Oh no. This was a brand new, gleaming vehicle, a light color that shone brilliantly under the afternoon sun. The tires looked factory fresh, and the paint didn't have a single scratch. I watched him open the trunk and carefully, almost protectively, place the expensive bags inside. Then he pulled out his phone and started talking to someone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language was utterly relaxed, completely at ease, like someone without a single urgent financial worry in the world. In that moment, a flood of memories washed over me. All those times Sienna had called Owen, pleading for help. It was always the same story. They couldn't pay the rent, they needed help with Leonard's medical expenses, they couldn't afford enough food for the week. And my son, with his boundless generosity, always found a way to send them something. But what I was seeing with my own eyes right then didn't match those desperate stories of need at all. The expensive bags, the brand new car, Leonard's relaxed demeanor, everything completely contradicted the version they had been feeding us for months. A cold, icy sensation began to spread through my body, like the chilling premonition that something truly terrible was about to happen. The cashier's words were starting to make a terrifying kind of sense, though I still fought against believing them completely. Could it really be possible that my daughter-in-law's family had been lying to us this whole time? Leonard ended his call and headed back towards the grocery store entrance. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone. His eyes scanned the parking lot carefully, meticulously, as if to make absolutely sure no one had seen him. That cautious attitude, that furtive glance, struck me as incredibly suspicious. My gut told me there was more to discover, and after what I had already seen, I couldn't just ignore the situation. I needed to be completely, utterly sure before I dared to talk to Owen about any of this. As I remained hidden, still absorbing the shock, my mind drifted back to how I had even gotten to this point. That morning, I had woken up with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It had been months since I had visited Sienna's family, and I really wanted to make a good impression, to bring something special to share. I went to my small kitchen and opened the old jar where I kept my meager savings. Counting those coins had become a painful, but necessary ritual. I carefully separated the wrinkled bills and coins I had been saving for weeks, sacrificing small pleasures like a cup of coffee at the bakery or a magazine at the newsstand. I had exactly $43. It wasn't much, but I had decided to use 20% of it to buy a decent cake at the neighborhood bakery. The rest I absolutely needed for my expenses the next week, mainly to buy my medications and some basic groceries. I showered with care and chose my best dress, the one I saved for truly special occasions. It was simple but clean, and it made me feel presentable. I styled my hair, trying my best to hide the gray strands that seemed to multiply every single day, and put on the fake pearl earrings my late mother had given me so many years ago. Before leaving, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I saw a 67-year-old woman who had worked her entire life, who had raised her son alone after being widowed, and who was now desperately trying to keep together a family that seemed to value money more than genuine feelings. Owen arrived to pick me up exactly on time. My son had always been punctual, a quality I deeply admired in him. When I got in his car, I noticed he seemed a little tense, a little preoccupied, but I thought maybe it was just nervousness about the family visit. During the ride, we talked about unimportant things. He told me about his office job, about some minor problems he'd had with his boss, but he consciously avoided talking about Sienna or her family. That struck me as very strange because he normally kept me thoroughly informed about how things were going in his marriage. When we arrived at the area where Sienna's family lived, I asked him to stop at the grocery store. I wanted to buy a fresh cake to go with lunch. Owen offered to go in with me, but I told him I preferred to go alone, that I wouldn't be long. The bakery inside the grocery store had several cakes available. I chose a simple vanilla cake, nothing extravagant but presentable. It cost exactly $18, $2 less than I had budgeted, which made me feel a small surge of happiness because it meant I could also buy a small greeting card. It was right there, in the checkout line, that everything happened. The cashier, the man who seemed to be my age, served me normally until he saw the name on the credit card I tried to use first. The card was rejected just as I expected, because I knew I didn't have sufficient funds. Then I took out the cash. It was at that precise moment that the man looked at me more closely, whispered my name, Adeline Thorne, and asked me if I was Owen's mother. When I confirmed that I was, his entire expression changed. He looked worried, almost scared. What he told me after grabbing my arm was something I will never, ever be able to forget. Though at that moment, I desperately refused to believe it. His words were direct, blunt, and incredibly painful. He told me that my daughter-in-law's family came to that grocery store regularly, spending hundreds of dollars on imported products and premium meats. While at the same time, he knew they were constantly asking my son for money. He explained that he knew the situation because Leonard had mentioned several times, with a certain pride, how my son helped them financially every single month. The cashier told me he had seen Leonard buy bottles of wine that cost more than I spent on food for a whole week. He also told me that Sienna frequently bought expensive beauty products and designer clothes there, always paying in cash. He concluded that it seemed incredibly unfair that a family who indulged in those luxuries was taking advantage of the generosity of a hardworking son and his elderly mother. The man explained that he had decided to talk to me because he had seen me carefully counting my coins, every single one, to pay for a simple cake, while they spent without a care on luxury items. He told me that his own mother had gone through a similar, heartbreaking situation, and that he deeply regretted not having acted in time. After hearing all of this, I left the grocery store utterly confused. My mind simply refused to fully process what I had heard. For years, I had trusted the word of Sienna and her family. I had watched my son worry about them, work extra hours to send them money, and I myself had contributed with the little I had on several occasions. But the cashier's words had planted a seed of doubt, a tiny, insidious seed that was now growing rapidly, painfully in my heart. That's why I decided to hide and observe. I needed to see with my own eyes if what I had been told was true. Because the consequences of that information, if it proved to be true, were far too serious to act on based on rumors alone. From my hiding spot behind the dumpsters, I could see everything happening in the parking lot perfectly. The smell of garbage wasn't pleasant, not by a long shot, but it was a small price I was willing to pay to discover the truth about the people I had trusted for so long. When I saw Leonard come out of the grocery store with those expensive bags, my heart tightened in my chest, a physical ache. The bags were from a store I knew only by its reputation for outrageously high prices. A single purchase there could easily cost me a whole month's grocery budget. Leonard walked with the confident swagger of someone who has no financial worries whatsoever. His clothes were new, his shoes shined, and his watch looked expensive even from where I was. Absolutely nothing about his appearance suggested the desperate poverty they always talked about. The car he put the groceries in was definitely new. The paint gleamed under the sun and the tires looked freshly bought, brand new. I mentally calculated that a vehicle like that could easily cost more money than I had seen put together in my whole life. How was it possible that someone who owned a car like that would need constant financial help? As I watched him talk on the phone, I noticed that his conversation was relaxed, even cheerful. It didn't seem to be the call of someone worried sick about financial problems. His body language was that of a satisfied person, comfortable with his situation, completely at peace. At that moment, all the small inconsistencies I had noticed over the past few months, the little things I had dismissed, began to click into place, making a terrifying kind of sense. The time Sienna had casually mentioned expensive restaurants where she had eaten, justifying it as invitations from friends. The comments about new clothes she had supposedly gotten on incredible sales. The social media photos that showed a lifestyle that simply didn't match their constant, tearful requests for help. Leonard ended his phone call and started walking back towards the grocery store entrance. His movements were confident, unhurried, like someone who had all the time in the world. That gave me the perfect chance to analyze his appearance and behavior better from my hiding spot. Not only were his clothes new, but they were of genuinely good quality. The shirt he was wearing had that perfect cut you only get at specialty stores, and his pants were impeccably ironed. Even his shoes, which I could see better as he got closer to my position, seemed to be made of genuine, expensive leather. While I was still waiting to see what else would happen, I heard voices coming from my right. Two elderly women were talking animatedly as they pushed their shopping carts toward their cars. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but when they mentioned Sienna's name, my ears perked up immediately, like a dog hearing its master's call. "Did you see the new dress Sienna was wearing at the mall yesterday?" One of them, a woman with gray hair who looked my age, said with a huff. It must have cost at least $200. I saw an identical one in that expensive store on the second floor. The other woman, who was thinner and wore glasses, responded with a knowing, conspiratorial tone. "And that's not all, Hermione. I also saw her buying beauty products at that French store. My granddaughter works there and told me that Sienna is a frequent customer. She spends as if money were raining from the sky." My heart started beating even faster. These women were talking about the same Sienna who constantly told my son they didn't have money for basic expenses. The same one who had called just last week, crying, asking for help to buy medicine for her father. Hermione continued, her voice laced with indignation. "What strikes me most is how she's always buying new things, but then goes around the neighborhood saying they're going through very difficult financial times. My friend Leonard works at the bank and told me the deposits they received don't match the story of poverty they're telling at all." "Oh, Hermione, but that's gossip," the other woman replied, though in a tone that suggested she had her own very strong doubts. "Although I must admit, It seems strange to me that they can afford the rent on that big house if they're really as bad off financially as they say. Gossip? Hermione scoffed. My daughter lives on the same block as them and tells me that almost every week, delivery trucks with groceries from the most expensive grocery store in the city arrive. Purchases that any of us would take months to be able to afford. The two women continued walking away as they talked, but I could still hear a few more fragments of their conversation. They mentioned something about parties Sienna's family had recently organized. Parties with abundant, high-quality food, imported wines, and expensive decorations. Every single word I heard was like a stab in my heart. For months, I had been feeling so sorry for that family, worrying about their well-being, asking my son to help them whenever he could, and even contributing my own small savings on several occasions. I remembered the time Sienna had called me directly, crying on the phone, her voice choked with tears, telling me they needed urgent help to pay for Leonard's doctor. She had told me they literally had to choose between buying medicine or food, and that they didn't know what to do. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind consumed with thoughts of their suffering. The very next day, I had gone to the bank and withdrawn $150 from my emergency savings. Money I had been saving for a possible medical emergency of my own, but which I decided to give her because I couldn't bear the thought of them suffering when I could help. Now, listening to these women talk about that same family's luxurious lifestyle, I felt like the most foolish woman in the world. How could I have been so incredibly naive? How had I not seen the signs that were apparently obvious to the entire neighborhood? Leonard came out of the grocery store again, this time with a smaller bag. He headed back to his car, but this time he stopped to talk to a man who was washing a car nearby. I couldn't hear the conversation, but they both seemed relaxed and friendly. The man Leonard was talking to wore work clothes, but you could tell he respected Leonard. His body language suggested that Leonard was someone of a certain status in the neighborhood, someone who commanded respect, quite possibly because of his financial situation. After a few minutes, I saw Leonard hand the man something. From my distance, it looked like money. Several bills that he handed over without apparent effort. A casual gesture. If they were truly going through such dire financial difficulties as they claimed, how could he afford to give money to strangers so easily? At that precise moment, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from Owen, asking me what had happened, why I was taking so long at the grocery store. I had completely forgotten about him, still waiting for me in the car, probably worried sick about my delay. I quickly replied that I was on my way out, that I had been stuck in a very long line. A lie. Lying to my own son hurt, a sharp ache in my chest, but I needed more time to process everything I had seen and heard. I couldn't just get back to his car and blurt out my suspicions immediately without more solid evidence. As I was writing the message, Leonard said goodbye to the man and got into his car. The engine started with a smooth, powerful sound, confirming once again that it was a good quality and probably recent vehicle. I watched him leave the parking lot with a tranquility that completely contrasted with the image of financial desperation his family had been projecting. I decided it was time to leave my hiding place and walk toward where Owen was. I needed to act normally, at least for now. But my mind was already racing, frantically trying to recall all the strange, small details I had overlooked in recent months. All the tiny signs that now, in this harsh new light, took on a completely different, sinister meaning. When I got to the car, Owen looked at me with concern, his brow furrowed. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale," he said as I settled into the passenger seat. "Did it take them a long time to check you out?" "Just the line, son," I replied, trying my best to keep my voice steady to sound normal. You know how grocery stores are on weekends. But inside my heart was beating so hard I was afraid he could hear it. Owen started the car, and we began heading to Sienna's family's house. During the ride, I tried to keep up a normal conversation, but my mind was still processing everything I had seen and heard at the grocery store. Every traffic light, every corner we passed, brought me closer to a meeting I now saw in a completely different, unsettling light. "How's Leonard's job been lately?" I asked my son, trying to sound casual, nonchalant. Last time I spoke to Sienna, she said things were very difficult for him. Owen sighed as he drove, a weary sound. "Yeah, Mom. Sienna told me her dad had to reduce his work hours because the company he works for is having problems. That's why we've been helping them a little more these past few months." That information didn't match at all the relaxed and prosperous attitude I had observed in Leonard just a few minutes earlier. A man who was truly worried about reduced work hours wouldn't be spending money at expensive stores or handing bills to strangers in a parking lot. "And how do you feel about that, son?" I asked, watching his expression in the rearview mirror. "I know you've been working a lot of extra hours lately." "Well, Mom, they're my family now," Owen replied in a tone that mixed palpable tiredness with a deep, resigned sense of duty. "Sienna is my wife, and when you get married, you also marry into the family. If they need help, it's my duty as a son-in-law to help them." His words broke my heart. My son, the kind and hard-working man I had raised, was sacrificing his own well-being for people who, from what I had discovered, were clearly taking advantage of his generosity. How much longer could this situation continue without seriously affecting his own financial stability, his entire future? We arrived at the neighborhood where Sienna's family lived. It was a pleasant residential area, with well-maintained houses and manicured lawns. It wasn't the most luxurious neighborhood in the city, but it was definitely not a place where people living in extreme financial difficulties would reside. As Owen looked for a place to park, I was able to get a better look at Sienna's family's house. It was a 2-story building with a well-decorated front lawn and a facade that had been recently painted. The windows had new curtains, and the front door looked like it had been renovated not long ago. "The house looks very well kept," I commented, trying to glean more information. "Didn't you tell me they were having trouble paying for some repairs?" "Oh yeah," Owen replied as he parked. "Leonard managed to get some extra work on weekends to make the most urgent repairs. He's been working a lot to keep the house in good condition." Another story that simply didn't add up. If Leonard were really working extra shifts just to survive, how would he have time to go grocery shopping at an expensive store during work hours? And more importantly, how would he have money to spend on luxury goods if everything he earned was supposedly going to house repairs? We got out of the car and walked to the front door. Owen was carrying some things he had brought, while I carried my cake, a mix of nervousness and curiosity swirling inside me, growing with every single step. Before we could even ring the doorbell, the door opened and Sienna appeared with a radiant smile. My first impression was one of total shock. Her appearance was completely transformed from the last time I had seen her, just a month ago. She was wearing a dress that was definitely not cheap. The fabric looked to be of excellent quality. The cut was perfect, and the vibrant colors gave her an elegant and sophisticated look. Her shoes were clearly new, with a shine that only freshly bought items have, and her handbag matched the outfit perfectly. But what struck me most was her hair and makeup. She had a professional cut that you only get at expensive salons, with highlights that shimmered in the sunlight. Her makeup was flawless, the kind that requires high-quality products and a lot of time to apply correctly. "Adeline, what a joy to see you," Sienna exclaimed, coming in for a hug. As she embraced me, I could smell her perfume, a costly fragrance I recognized, because I had once seen its price at a store, and it seemed equivalent to my 2-week food budget. "Hello, Sienna," I managed to say, trying desperately to hide my surprise. "You look great. That dress is beautiful." "This old dress," she replied with a laugh that seemed a little forced, a little too casual. "I bought it on a clearance sale months ago. You know how it is. When you find good deals, you have to take advantage of them." That explanation sounded exactly like the one the woman at the grocery store had mentioned. There was always a justification for every expensive item. Incredible deals, gifts from friends, secondhand purchases that looked brand new. How many extraordinary coincidences could one family possibly have? We went into the house, and I immediately noticed other details that simply didn't fit with the story of financial difficulties. The living room had been recently redecorated. The furniture wasn't the same as I remembered from my last visit. There was a new leather sofa that looked expensive, a glass coffee table that gleamed impeccably, and several decorative objects that were definitely not cheap. On the wall was a large flat-screen TV that hadn't been there before. It was a recent model, one of those that cost several $1,000s. How could a family in a financial crisis possibly explain the purchase of a luxury television? "Dad, look who came to visit," Sienna called towards the inside of the house. Leonard appeared from what seemed to be the kitchen, wiping his hands with a towel. When he saw me, his expression changed ever so slightly. There was a flicker in his eyes, as if for a fleeting moment he had seen something he didn't expect, but he quickly regained his usual welcoming smile. "Adeline, so good to see you," he said, approaching to greet me. "We hope you're hungry because Sienna has prepared a delicious meal." It was the same Leonard I had seen at the grocery store just an hour before, but now he was acting as if he hadn't left the house all day. His clothes were the same, but he had put an apron over his shirt, as if he had genuinely been cooking. I brought a cake to go with it, I said, handing him the box. I hope you like it. What a lovely gesture, Sienna exclaimed. But it wasn't necessary, Adeline. You know you're always welcome here without having to bring a thing. As she spoke, I could see over her shoulder into the kitchen. The counters were full of ingredients and utensils that suggested an elaborate culinary preparation. I could make out expensive-looking cuts of meat, fresh and exotic vegetables, and bottles of imported seasonings. The sheer amount of food they were preparing could easily feed a family for several days, and the quality of the ingredients was noticeably superior to what I could afford to buy for my own meals. Did you two prepare all this? I asked, genuinely impressed by the abundance. Well, we wanted to do something special for your visit, Leonard replied. You don't get to have Owen's mother over every day. Besides, we got some ingredients on sale, so we decided to take advantage. The miraculous sales again. I began to seriously wonder if this family possessed an extraordinary knack for finding deals, or if these explanations were simply a convenient way to justify expenses they couldn't honestly explain. Owen seemed completely oblivious to my observations. He was chatting animatedly with Sienna about his job and his plans for the next week. His relaxed attitude confirmed that he truly believed the version of reality they had presented to him. But I could no longer ignore the growing pile of evidence before my eyes. Every detail of that house, every aspect of Sienna's and Leonard's appearance, every convenient explanation, everything pointed to the same unsettling conclusion. This family was not, absolutely not, going through the financial difficulties they claimed to be facing. During lunch, I tried to maintain a normal conversation while discreetly, almost imperceptibly, observing every detail that could confirm or disprove my suspicions. The table was set with dinnerware I didn't remember seeing before, plates and glasses that seemed to be of good quality, definitely not the kind of utensils someone worried about every penny would use. The food they served was abundant and varied. There were several main courses, elaborate salads, and side dishes that required expensive ingredients. Leonard poured wine into crystal glasses, a wine I recognized from having seen its price at the grocery store, more than $50 a bottle. This wine is delicious, I commented, trying to get more information. Is it a special brand? Oh, this one, Leonard replied with a proud smile. A friend of mine who works in imports got it for me at a special price. Normally, we couldn't afford wines like this. But when these opportunities come up, you have to take advantage. There was always a perfect explanation, always a generous friend or an incredible deal that justified every single luxury. I was starting to wonder how many generous friends one family could possibly have, and how frequent those extraordinary deals could be. While we ate, Sienna casually mentioned some plans they had for the next month. She talked about a family celebration they were organizing, an event that, as she described it, would require a considerable investment in decorations, food, and entertainment. Sounds expensive, I said without thinking, my words slipping out. Expensive? Sienna laughed a little too brightly. Well, we've been saving for this for months. Besides, Leonard got an extra job that will help us cover the expenses. I immediately remembered what I had seen at the grocery store just a few hours earlier. Leonard spending money as if he had no worries, buying luxury products, driving a brand new car. What was the truth about his work situation? What kind of extra job did you get, Leonard? I asked directly. For a moment, I saw an expression of discomfort cross his face, a fleeting shadow, as if my question had caught him completely off guard, but he quickly regained his composure. Weekend consulting, he replied vaguely, his gaze unfocused. Nothing too exciting, but it helps supplement the family income. His answer was so general, so evasive, it could mean anything or nothing at all. A man who was truly doing weekend consulting would probably talk with more specificity about his work, especially when the question came from his son-in-law's mother. During the conversation, I noticed that Sienna's phone was constantly vibrating. Every time she looked at the screen, she smiled in a way that seemed significant to me, a private, knowing smile. At one point, when she thought no one was watching her, she replied to a message, typing quickly with a look of pure satisfaction on her face. Everything okay with the phone? I asked, feigning casual curiosity. Oh, just some friends organizing a get-together for next week, she replied quickly, putting her phone away. You know how women are, always planning something. But there was something about her expression that didn't convince me. The way she had smiled while reading the messages suggested that the content was far more meaningful than simple social plans. After lunch, Leonard offered to show me some of the improvements they had made to the house. We walked through different rooms, and in each one, I noticed new or renovated elements. The floors had been recently polished, some walls had fresh paint, and several pieces of furniture had been replaced or rearranged. In the master bedroom, I saw something that particularly caught my attention. On top of the dresser were several shopping bags from expensive stores, some still unopened. The price tags I managed to glimpse showed numbers that seemed exorbitant for a family that was supposedly struggling financially. "Sienna went shopping recently?" I asked, gesturing discreetly toward the bags. Leonard replied with a nervous laugh, a strained sound. "She found some incredible clearance sales this week. Sometimes it's better to buy things when they're on sale, even if you don't need them immediately." That logic seemed completely contradictory to me. A family that was truly in financial difficulty would not have the luxury of buying things they didn't need immediately, no matter how good the deals were. As we returned to the living room, my phone rang. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, my heart leaped. It was from the grocery store cashier. He had gotten my number somehow and had sent me a photo. The image showed a grocery receipt from just 2 days earlier. The total was over $400, and the list included premium products, imported meats, fresh seafood, expensive wines, specialty cheeses, and several gourmet items. The name on the receipt was clearly Leonard Williams. Along with the photo was a simple yet devastating message. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should see this. This receipt is from 2 days ago. Your family needs to know the truth." My heart started beating even faster, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The evidence was there in black and white, undeniable. A $400 purchase of luxury goods made just 2 days before our visit, by the very same man who was supposedly struggling to pay for basic expenses. I quickly put my phone away before anyone noticed my expression of shock. But my mind was already working, connecting all the dots I had been observing over the past few hours. We returned to where Owen and Sienna were, who were still chatting animatedly. My son seemed relaxed and happy, enjoying what he thought was quality time with his in-laws. He had absolutely no idea of the theatrical performance he was witnessing. "Are you feeling okay, Mom?" Owen asked me, probably noticing that my expression had visibly changed. "You look a little pale." "Just a little tired," I lied, my voice tight. "I'm not used to such long outings anymore." Sienna immediately offered to make me some tea or get me something to make me feel better. Her apparent concern would have been touching, genuinely, if I hadn't been starting to understand the true, cold nature of her character. For the next hour, I continued to observe and listen, mentally collecting evidence of every inconsistency, every inexplicable luxury, every convenient justification. The list grew constantly. Sienna's new clothes, Leonard's car, the well-maintained house, the abundant food, the expensive wine, the shopping bags, the devastating receipt I had received. But what hurt me the most, what truly twisted my gut, was the slow, dawning realization that this entire situation had probably been going on for months, maybe even years. How much money had my son sent to this family? How many sacrifices had he made, working himself to exhaustion? And how many had I made from my own meager savings to help people who didn't actually need help, not one bit? When we finally said goodbye and left the house, my mind was completely made up. I couldn't let this elaborate farce continue. My son deserved to know the truth, however painful it was, and I had a responsibility, a mother's fierce duty, to protect him from further manipulation. During the drive back home, Owen commented on how nice the visit had been and how well Sienna's family looked. His words were like daggers in my heart because I knew I would soon have to shatter that happy image with a much darker, much more disappointing reality. "Yes, they look very well," I replied carefully, choosing my words with absolute precision. Maybe too well for a family that's going through such severe difficulties. The drive back home was one of the most difficult of my life. Every mile we drove took me physically away from the house where I had discovered the truth, but brought me emotionally closer to a decision that would change everything for my family, forever. My mind was a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts, doubts, and a growing sense of indignation that I struggled desperately to keep under control. Owen was driving calmly, occasionally whistling a tune that showed his good mood, his carefree spirit. For him, we had simply spent a pleasant afternoon with his in-laws, sharing a delicious meal and strengthening family ties. He had no idea that his mother had been silently collecting evidence of what seemed to be an elaborate and prolonged scam. "Mom," he said as we waited at a traffic light, I'm so glad to see you get along so well with Sienna's family. I know you had some reservations about our marriage at first, but I think now you can see what good people they are. His words broke my heart, truly shattered it. My son, my only son, was being manipulated by people who had turned the exploitation of his generosity into an art form. How could I tell him that the people in whom he had placed his trust and his money were probably professional liars? Owen, I began carefully, my voice softer than I intended. Have you ever noticed anything inconsistent in the stories Sienna tells you about their financial situation? My son glanced at me briefly, a flicker of something in his eyes before returning his gaze to the traffic. What do you mean, Mom? Inconsistent how? Well, I continued, choosing my words very carefully, trying to be as gentle as possible. Today I noticed they have a lot of new things in the house. The television, some furniture, Sienna's clothes, all of that costs a considerable amount of money. Owen sighed, and I could see that my comment had hit a nerve, a raw spot. Mom, I already explained that Leonard has been getting extra jobs. Besides, Sienna is very good at finding deals and bargains. Not everything that looks new is necessarily expensive. But don't you think it's strange that a family that needs constant help for basic expenses can afford so many luxuries at the same time? I insisted, trying desperately to keep my tone neutral and non-accusatory. They're not luxuries, Mom, Owen replied with a touch of defensiveness in his voice, his jaw tightening. They're basic needs they've been able to meet thanks to a lot of effort and sacrifice. They bought the TV secondhand. The furniture was a one-time opportunity, and Sienna's clothes are from clearance sales. Each justification my son repeated was exactly the same one I had heard from Leonard and Sienna during lunch. It was as if they had rehearsed these explanations to perfection, creating a consistent version of reality that could satisfy any uncomfortable question. I decided to try a different approach. Son, have you seen any receipts or documents that confirm these incredible deals? Or have you accompanied Sienna when she finds these extraordinary bargains? The question clearly made him uncomfortable. I could see his hands tighten slightly on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Mom, why these questions? He said, his voice rising a little. Sienna is my wife. If she tells me she got something on sale, I believe her. Marriage is based on trust. His answer confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Owen had never seen direct evidence of these supposed deals and extra jobs. He was blindly believing everything they told him because he trusted the people he loved, implicitly. Of course, son, I replied softly, my heart aching. Trust is fundamental in marriage, but it's also important to protect yourself from people who might take advantage of that trust. Are you insinuating that Sienna and her family are deceiving me? Owen asked, his voice now clearly annoyed, angry. Mom, that's a very serious accusation. I'm not accusing anyone, I said quickly, realizing I had pushed too hard, too fast. I'm just expressing some concerns I have as a mother who loves you and wants to see you happy and prosperous. The rest of the trip passed in an intense, heavy silence. Owen was clearly processing my conversation, but I could see from his expression that my words had created more resistance than reflection. It was evident that any criticism towards Sienna and her family would be received as a personal attack. When we arrived at my apartment, Owen helped me out of the car, but his goodbye hug was colder than usual, stiff and distant. Mom, he said before leaving, I hope you can give Sienna's family a chance. They're good people who are doing the best they can in difficult circumstances. I'll keep that in mind, son, I replied, knowing he would interpret my response as a promise to be more understanding, when in reality it was the exact opposite. That night, alone in my small apartment, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea, trying to organize all the chaotic thoughts that had been bombarding my mind for the past few hours. I had abundant circumstantial evidence, testimonies from neighbors, my own personal observations, and even a photo of that damning $400 grocery receipt. But I also had a son who was completely convinced that his wife and her family were victims of difficult circumstances, who deserved his help and compassion. Any direct attempt to confront this belief had resulted in resistance and defensiveness. I took out my phone and looked at the photo of the receipt the grocery store cashier had sent me again. The numbers were indisputable. Over $400 in luxury goods purchased just 2 days before our visit. That amount represented more than I spent on food for an entire month. As I looked at that hard evidence, I remembered all the times Owen had come home, utterly stressed after working extra hours to send money to Sienna's family. I remembered the occasions when I myself had contributed with my few savings, feeling genuinely sorry for their supposed desperate situation. The indignation I had been holding back all day finally began to emerge with a furious force. It wasn't just the money that bothered me, though. That was certainly significant. It was the emotional manipulation, the systematic exploitation of my son's good feelings, and the calculated, cold way they had built a web of lies to sustain their luxurious lifestyle at our family's expense. It also pained me deeply to realize that they had probably been laughing at us behind our backs. Every time we sent money, every time we worried about their well-being, every time we made sacrifices to help them, they probably saw it as evidence of our naivety and ease of being manipulated. But what tortured me most was the question of what to do with this overwhelming information. I had the evidence. I had the observations. I had the documented inconsistencies. But I also had a son who would refuse to believe anything negative about his wife without absolutely irrefutable proof. If I acted too quickly or too confrontationally, I ran the grave risk of alienating Owen and pushing him even further towards Sienna. But if I didn't act soon, the manipulation would continue, possibly getting worse over time, and my son would continue to be exploited financially and emotionally. I decided I needed more evidence. Evidence that was so clear, so indisputable, that even Owen couldn't deny or rationalize it away. I couldn't rely only on observations and suspicions. I needed concrete proof that would rip away the facade and reveal the true nature of the people who had so cruelly deceived my family. That night, before I finally fell asleep, I made a decision that would change the course of the events that followed. I would not directly confront Owen until I had absolutely solid evidence. Instead, I would begin my own discreet investigation, silently collecting proof that was impossible to deny or explain with convenient stories about miraculous deals and mysterious extra jobs. The following days were the most difficult I had experienced in years. Every interaction with Owen had become an exercise in extreme self-control, trying to maintain normalcy while my mind constantly worked on how to address the shocking situation I had uncovered. The evidence I had collected weighed on my conscience like a heavy burden I couldn't share. During that week, I received 3 more messages from the grocery store cashier. Each one contained additional information that confirmed and expanded my initial suspicions. He sent me photos of other receipts for purchases made by Leonard and Sienna in recent weeks, all showing excessive spending on unnecessary and expensive products. One of the photos showed a receipt for over $600, which included 2 bottles of French champagne costing more than $100 each, imported seafood, and several gourmet cheeses. The date on that particular receipt was the same day Sienna had called Owen, pleading for urgent help to pay the rent. I also received information from Hermione, one of the women I had heard talking at the grocery store. She had gotten my phone number through a mutual friend and contacted me because she had decided I needed to know more details about the situation. Hermione told me that Sienna's family had been organizing regular lavish parties at their house, events with professional catering and expensive decorations. She described a birthday party for Leonard that had cost, according to the guests' comments, several $1,000s in food, drinks, and entertainment. Adeline, she told me during a phone call, her voice hushed. My daughter lives on the same block, and she tells me that delivery trucks with expensive purchases, clothes, appliances, furniture are constantly arriving. It's just not normal for a family that is supposedly in a financial crisis. Each new piece of information made it harder to maintain my silence, a painful tightening in my throat. But I knew I needed the right moment and circumstances to present all of this to Owen in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed or rationalized. The moment came on a Wednesday night when Owen came to visit me after work. He looked especially tired and stressed, his shoulders slumped. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me that Sienna had asked him for additional money for a medical emergency for Leonard. He needs a minor surgery, Owen explained, rubbing his temples with clear signs of tension. The insurance doesn't cover everything, and they need $200 by Friday. I've been working double shifts all week to be able to get the money together. That was the last straw. $200 for a supposed medical emergency requested by the very same family that had spent $600 on champagne and seafood just a few days earlier. I couldn't let my son sacrifice himself anymore for these elaborate lies. Owen, I said, taking his calloused hands in mine, my voice trembling slightly. I need to show you something. But before I do, I want you to know that I'm doing this because I love you, and because I can't stand to see you being hurt like this. I took out my phone and showed him the first photo of the $400 receipt. His eyes widened in disbelief when he saw the date and the total. But before he could even speak, I showed him the other photos I had received during the week, one after another, each more damning than the last. "Mom, where did you get this?" Owen asked, looking at the images with an expression that mixed confusion, denial, and a dawning, terrible realization. "And how do you know these receipts are real?" I explained my encounter with the grocery store cashier, the conversations I had overheard from the neighbors, and all the observations I had made during our visit. I spoke slowly and carefully, presenting each piece of evidence logically and chronologically, leaving no room for doubt. "But there has to be an explanation," Owen insisted, although his voice no longer sounded as convinced as before, the conviction replaced by a desperate hope. "Maybe Leonard had a good month at work. Or maybe they received money from another source." "Son," I replied gently, my voice full of sorrow, "these luxury purchases were made on the same days that Sienna called you asking for help with basic expenses. Doesn't that seem like too much of a coincidence?" I could see the realization, a cold, hard truth, starting to sink into his mind. His eyes moved frantically between the photos on my phone and my face, looking for some way, any way, to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had believed for so long. "Besides," I continued, showing him the information I had gotten about the expensive parties, "the neighbors have seen how this family really lives. It's not the story of desperate poverty they've been telling you." Owen got up from his chair and started pacing my small living room, a restless, agitated movement. I could see his mind working furiously, recalling past conversations, broken promises, and all those small inconsistencies that he had probably ignored or rationalized before. "But why would they do this?" he finally asked, his voice sounding completely defeated, broken. "Why would Sienna lie to me about something so important?" "Because it worked," I replied honestly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Because you've been sending them money regularly without asking questions, trusting their word. For them, you're a reliable source of additional income that they can use to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't otherwise afford." Tears began to form in my son's eyes, and then streamed down his face, unbidden. Seeing his pain broke my heart, a sharp, searing ache, but I knew it was absolutely necessary to free him from this destructive manipulation. "How much money have I given them in total?" he asked, though he seemed terrified of the answer. We had reached the moment of complete truth, of no more hiding. "According to what you've told me over the past few months," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "probably more than $5,000. And that's not counting the help I've given them myself." The number hit him like a physical punch. $5,000 represented months of extra work, countless personal sacrifices, and lost opportunities for his own future, all given to people who had been systematically, deliberately deceiving him. "I need to talk to Sienna," he said finally, his voice imbued with a determination I hadn't heard in a long time. "I need to confront her with this information and hear her explanation." "Are you sure you're ready for that conversation?" I asked him, my voice serious. "Once you put this information on the table, there will be no turning back. Your relationship will change forever no matter what her answer is." Owen was silent for several minutes, looking at the photos on my phone over and over again, as if hoping they would change. I could see him processing not only the cold, hard financial evidence, but also the profound emotional implications of having been so cruelly deceived by the person he loved. "Mom," he said finally, his voice choked with emotion, "thank you for showing me this. I know it must have been incredibly difficult for you to decide whether to tell me or not, but you were right. I needed to know the truth." I hugged him tightly, feeling both immense relief that the burden was finally shared and a deep, gnawing worry about what would come next. The truth had finally come to light, but now came the most difficult part, facing the brutal consequences of years of lies and manipulation. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I'm going home tonight, and I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my wife," Owen replied with a firmness he hadn't shown in months. "And depending on what she says, I'm going to make some important decisions about our future." Owen left my apartment that night with a fierce determination I hadn't seen in him for months. I stayed awake very late, unable to sleep, my mind consumed with wondering how the confrontation between my son and his wife would unfold. I knew the next few hours would be crucial, pivotal, for the future of our family. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was Owen, and his voice sounded completely different when I answered. There was a raw mix of pain, anger, and something that sounded like a profound cathartic relief. "Mom," he said without preamble, his voice strained. "You were right about everything, completely." "What happened, son?" I asked, although from his tone, I could already imagine that the confrontation had not gone well for Sienna. "When I got home, I decided to check some things before I talked to her," he began, his voice flat. "I went to our room and looked through her things, something I had never done before because I trusted her completely." His voice broke. "What I found left me speechless." Owen told me that he had found several shopping bags hidden deep in the closet, all from expensive stores with receipts that showed hundreds of dollars in expenses for clothes and accessories. He also found jewelry he had never seen Sienna wear, still with their original price tags. But that wasn't the worst part, Mom. In her purse, I found a notebook where she had written down all the money she's asked me for over the past 2 years. Every lie, every emergency, every invented story is documented there as if it were a job. My heart sank when I heard this. The situation was even worse, far more insidious than I had imagined. Not only had they been lying about their financial situation, but they had been keeping a detailed, meticulous record of their scam as if it were a legitimate business. "And what else was in that notebook?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I feared the answer. "Plans to ask for more money," Owen replied bitterly, a choking sound. She had noted that the next story would be a dental emergency for her. Mother, that would cost $1 in 800. She also had notes on how to make me feel guilty if I doubted her or asked too many questions. The cold, calculating nature of it all sickened me. These weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. It had been a systematic, deliberate manipulation designed specifically to exploit my son's good feelings, his inherent kindness. "And when did you confront her with all this?" I asked. "At first, she tried to deny everything," Owen continued. "She said the purchases were gifts from friends, that the notebook was just to keep track of household expenses, that I was misinterpreting everything. But when I showed her the photos you had of the grocery store receipts, her strategy changed completely." "How did it change?" She got furious. Absolutely furious. She yelled at me that I had no right to go through her things, that my family had never really accepted her, and that it was all your fault for putting ideas in my head. She said you had always been a meddling mother-in-law who wanted to destroy our marriage. Those accusations hurt, a sharp, familiar pain, but they didn't surprise me. It was typical of professional manipulators to try to turn the situation around, to play the victim, when confronted with irrefutable evidence of their lies. But what impacted me most, Owen continued, his voice heavy with disbelief, was when she finally admitted the truth. She told me that her family had never been in a financial crisis, that Leonard has a stable job that pays well, and that it had all been a strategy to take advantage of my generosity. He paused, the silence thick with his pain. "She used that word specifically, Mom. Take advantage." "Exactly that word, Mom. She said I was easy to convince and that my family had money that we could afford to share, as if we were responsible for maintaining their luxurious lifestyle." The conversation continued for over an hour. Owen told me every agonizing detail of the confrontation, every lie that had been revealed, every manipulation that had finally been exposed. The picture that emerged was of a family that had turned deception into a way of life, a calculated business. "I also called Leonard during the argument," Owen told me. "I wanted to hear his version of events. At first, he tried to stick to the original story, but when I told him I already